after most of the pandemic is over. Our inquiry, we hope, will be complementary to this, being focused on lessons that can be learned already and which can be applied during the months ahead to benefit decisions that have to be taken during those months ahead. And of course, the evidence that we gather in our inquiry will be available to the public inquiry. We will hear from the Health Secretary in 2 weeks' time, just over 2 weeks, on the 10th of June, after which we will make our report to Parliament. Just a word on how we'll organise this morning's proceedings. This is a hybrid meeting, with some members of the Joint Committee joining remotely and some in person. We'll have 4 sections. The first about the early days of the pandemic, which I will chair. My colleague Jeremy Hunt will then share a discussion on lockdown measures and the performance of test and trace. I will then chair a section on vaccines. And finally, Jeremy will chair the final section on the lockdowns of the autumn and winter period. We'll have a short pause between these sections, during which time the cameras will be briefly turned off. So I'm very pleased to welcome Dominic Cummings, the Chief Advisor to the Prime Minister from July 2019 to November 2020. Good morning, Mr. Cummings, and thank you for offering to appear. Perhaps I could start with some general questions about the background to the COVID pandemic before turning to my colleagues. In your Rose Garden statement, you said, "For years, I've warned of the dangers of pandemics. Last year, I wrote about the possible threat of coronaviruses and the urgent need for planning." And indeed, your blog of March 2019 warned of escapes of viruses from labs in Asia as posing, and I quote, "a real danger of a worldwide pandemic that could kill human beings on a vast scale." So, given this context, on the 22nd of January, Wuhan, a city the size of London by population, was sealed off from the rest of the world. On the 30th of January, the WHO declared a public health emergency of international concern. Given what you'd thought about this over the years past, did this set alarm bells ringing, and did you think what you'd thought about in advance was happening?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's right that the public selected representatives are trying to figure out what happened and the lessons to be learned. I hope you'll get all the senior people involved in here to speak to you about it. The truth is that senior ministers, senior officials, senior advisors like me fell disastrously short of the standards that the public has a right to expect of its government in a crisis like this. When the public needed us most, the government failed. And I'd like to say to all the families of those who died unnecessarily, how sorry I am for the mistakes that were made and for my own mistakes at that. Regarding the beginning of this crisis, yes, you're right that that I, like many people, had talked about this before. When it started in January, I did think, in part of my mind, oh my goodness, is this it? Is this what people have been warning about all of this time? However, at the time, the PHE here and the WHO and the sort of the CDC, generally speaking, organisations across the Western world were not kind of ringing great alarm bells about it then. I think it's, in retrospect, completely obvious that many institutions failed on this early question. But the truth is, I can't remember the precise date, but I think the Taiwanese government basically hit the panic button on something like New Year's Eve of 2019. It might not be the exact date, but within a few days. And they put into effect a plan which they'd figured out from having been terrified of previous outbreaks like SARS and whatnot. And they immediately closed the borders, they introduced very strict quarantine systems, they did a whole bunch of things right off the bat in January. But I think it's obvious that the Western world, including Britain, just completely failed to see the smoke and to hear the alarm bells in January. There's no doubt about it.
Was there a
There were
time?
meeting.
Do you remember a time when you personally were seized of the importance of it?
Well, I talked to people in January about it. On something like the 25th of January, I said to the private office in number 10 that we should look at pandemic planning. I said that I wanted to go up to Portland Down and talk to some of the people up there about it. I think the same day, possibly one day before or after, I said to Matt Hancock, where are we in terms of scanning the pandemic preparations plans? Are we completely up to speed on this? Is it resourced the way that it should be, etc., etc.?
So that was about the 25th of January.
Do you want to get the exact date?
If you have it.
It was 25th of January on both things. 25th of January I spoke to private office, and 25th of January I said to the Secretary of State. I actually.
When you said, was that a conversation or was that a memo or a text?
So I've got the exact words of a text that I sent him. I think I spoke to him that day, possibly the next day, at a meeting about it as well. I said, quote, "To what extent have you investigated preparations for something terrible like Ebola or a flu pandemic? Please ensure we take a risk-averse approach to funding preparations in the SR." SR's abbreviation for spending review.
Right.
"I'm going to dig into this plus bioterror," to which Hancock replied, "We've got full plans up to and including pandemic levels, regularly prepped and refreshed, CMOs and epidemiologists. We're stress testing now. It's our top tier risk register. We had an SR bid before this." I replied, "Great. I'm reading about the CDC and preparations for a flu pandemic. It's very worrying."
Right.
So
So the 25th of January, you instigated a set of inquiries within the system. Would you,
yes.
would you
However,
be able to...
I'd like to stress, though, that I'd like to stress and apologise for the fact that it is true that I did this, but I did not follow up on this and push it the way that I should have done. We were told in number 10 at the time, this is literally top of the risk register. This has been planned and there's been exercises on this over and over again. Everyone knows exactly what to do. And it's sort of tragic and in a way that someone who wrote so often about running red teams and not trusting things and not digging into things, whilst I was running red teams on lots of other things in government at this time, I didn't do it on this. And it's if I'd said at the end of January, we're going to take a Saturday and I want all of these documents put on the table and I want it all gone through and I want outside experts here to look at it all, then we'd have figured out much earlier that all the claims about brilliant preparations and how everything was in order were basically completely hollow. But we didn't figure this out until the back end of February.
Thank you. We'll come on to more detailed aspects of that. In terms of those texts that you referred to that first documented your concerns and your involvement, would you share them with the committee after the meeting?
Sure, yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, there were, just to be clear, there were conversations about it earlier, before that in January in number 10, because it was periodically on the news. It would sort of flare up and be big news and then it would die out again. So I don't want to imply that was the first time that number 10 talked about it, because that's not the case. There were conversations in number 10 about it right in the first week back in January.
When we talk about number 10, there are lots of people that work in number 10. When did you talk to the Prime Minister about it first?
It was definitely raised with the Prime Minister in the first half of January for sure, because it was on the news.
And did you have a conversation with him about it?
Yes.
When would that be?
First half of January.
And was that was a chat, a conversation rather than
just general
an exchange?
Chat with me and other people.
Yeah, I see. During the months that followed, was COVID the most important matter that you dealt with from January onwards?
It sort of depends what you mean. I mean, retrospectively, it was the most important issue, obviously, but at the time...
How did it feel at the time?
The government well, in no way, shape or form did the government act like in January like it was the most important thing. It didn't act like it was the most important thing in February, never mind in January.
Well, what proportion of your time would you say, perhaps in those early months, February, for example, what proportion of your time was devoted to it in February?
In January, not very much. In February, a lot. Of my personal time, a lot more.
More than half, or less than that?
I would say the first half of February, probably less than half. After the reshuffle, which I think was the 12th or something like that, more than half.
And then that increased, did it, after that?
By the last week by roughly the last 10 days of February, it was over 90% of what I was personally spending my time on, though there were other things kind of floating in and out. But it was certainly not, I think this is a really important point to register. The government itself, and Number 10, was not operating on a war footing in February on this in any way, shape or form. Lots of key people were literally skiing in the middle of February. It wasn't until the last week of February that there was really any sort of sense of urgency, I would say, across the in terms of Number 10 in the Cabinet Office.
Would you say that you were operating on a war footing in February?
As I said before, I think in the first 10 days or so of February, no, because there were all sorts of things going on. There was the HS2 nightmare, there was the reshuffle going on, and then that happened on the 12th, and then the PM went away on holiday for 2 weeks. And then after that, I didn't go on holiday. I was in Downing Street throughout that period, and I spent more and more of my time on it. However, and again, I want to apologise for this. I didn't. Obviously, in retrospect, I should have been hitting the panic button far more than I was in February. I did increasingly hit the panic button as February went on, but I, like most people, I think were wrongly reassured by things like the WHO and about what we were being told internally.
Well, the WHO declared a public health emergency of international concern on the 30th of January. So the WHO was not giving reassurance, quite the opposite.
They did say that, but it wasn't. After the 30th of January, it was not at all seen in Whitehall that there was going to be a pandemic.
I'm talking about Whitehall. I'm talking about what's going on around the world. We had TV pictures of Wuhan being sealed off, reports of people's doors being welded shut.
Yeah.
Were you not aware of that at that time,
Yes.
towards the end of January? Right.
Yes.
And you weren't on a war footing, and you've explained that's something that you regret. Just kind of finally on this, you said that it didn't occupy the majority of your time during February, it increased over time. Just give a brief summary of what were the other things that you were dealing with, what were the principal demands in your time during February?
There was, well, I was working very much on the whole kind of science and technology agenda. I was working on procurement reform. Ironically, in January and early Feb, one of the things that I spent most of my own time on was trying to get to grips with the procurement system. We ended up having to, and I had regular weekly meetings in the cabinet room on procurement in January and February to try and get to grips with the nightmare of that whole thing. Ironically, that was completely overtaken by the COVID. We had to bin the procurement meetings that I was running because of the procurement problems with COVID, if you see what I mean.
So
there was
science,
planning, procurement, science and
anything
technology.
else?
There were various national security issues that I was dealing with in February. But essentially, there was kind of the first 10 days of February, which were HS2, reshuffle, various things like that. And then the Prime Minister and other people went off on holiday. And then I was dealing with some of those things from the 12th, but then increasingly with COVID in the second half of the last 2 weeks of February.
Okay.
I also sent, so after the election, I hired a guy, a physicist called Ben Warner, and brought him into number 10 to try and start to build a proper data and analytical office in number 10, because one of the great problems that number 10 had in 2019 when I was there was a huge lack of these kind of skills.
So that was taking time.
So I brought him in. I sent him off to start attending the SAGE meetings.
Let's come on to that, because I want to ask some questions about SAGE meetings, everyone, and I want to leave time for comments on this. So just again, some contextual questions. Obviously, you're not just the advisor, but the chief advisor to the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Did you have to book meetings with him, or did you, as it were, pop in and out of his office?
I would just pop in and out of his office.
You sat literally outside the door, I think. Is that right?
No, effectively, yes. Not literally, but yes.
Right. And did you write notes to him as well, or was it through that kind of informal popping into the office?
I sometimes wrote notes, but most of our interaction was talking.
Did you write any notes to him about the COVID situation during January and February?
I did in February. I'm not sure if I did in January.
Did you keep a copy of it?
I can check exactly what I said to him in February in terms of things that were written down.
And if you have it, will you share it with the committee?
Yes, I will.
Thank you. What about, so you were there sitting outside the office, you sent at least one note. Did you use text and WhatsApp with thoughts on,
yes,
on the pandemic there? Have you kept copies of those during that period?
Not all, but lots, yes.
Okay, could you share those that are relevant to what the response to COVID was during that period?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. And just finally on some of the meetings, COBRA is the principal emergency response apparatus of the government. It met on the 24th of January, so
yes.
Before the WHO had raised its international alert. It met another 4 times in the 5 weeks before the month of March. Did you go to those COBRA meetings?
I'm not sure now if I attended the COBRA meetings. I don't think that I did. What I did was I sent, as I said before, I hired a guy to run data for number 10.
But was that did you choose not to go, or were you stopped from going?
So it was a question of basically dividing up different people's time. So what I did was I sent Ben Warner, the data scientist, and Imran, who was the Prime Minister's personal secretary who dealt with the NHS and the whole COVID thing. So mainly speaking in February, those 2 attended COBRA meetings.
The 5 meetings. Do you remember whether you attended any COBRA meeting in February?
I don't remember.
Right. Did you advise the Prime Minister that he should go to the COBRA meetings?
No, I did not.
Why, given this is the principal body that brings all of the security people, the health security people, the intelligence people together, why didn't you go, and why didn't you advise the Prime Minister to go?
Well, as I say, I didn't go because it was a better use of everyone's time for Ben Warner and for Imran to actually attend those meetings. I spoke and had briefings one-to-one with Patrick Vallance, the Chief Scientific Advisor, and with Chris Whitty about specific things. Lots of COBRA meetings are basically just sort of going through PowerPoint slides and are not massively useful.
So that was your take, that COBRA wasn't worth your time?
No, it was not that COBRA wasn't worth my time, but in terms of what was the best use of everybody's time, the best use of everybody's time was to have... Ben Warner was actually a scientist, so he attended the SAGE meetings in February on behalf of number 10, for which there's been some criticism, but I think it was absolutely the right decision that I took to do that. And he and Imran attended the COBRA meetings. I was briefed one-to-one by Patrick and by Chris and by other people where I could dig into a lot of other questions. Also bear in mind, one of the huge problems we had throughout was things leaking and causing chaos in the media.
Leaking from COBRA?
Leaking from COBRA, leaking from practically everything. And so when I wanted to have sensitive conversations that I didn't want to see appear in the media, I did not have those conversations in Cobra. I had those
so
conversations
just
one-to-one.
pause on that. So you're saying that the meeting, the most secure meeting in Whitehall, literally named after a room, the Cabinet Office briefing room, where you've got to leave your phone outside, it's swept for bugs. That meeting was so insecure that you didn't feel that you could speak candidly at it. You said you were concerned about leaks. That's presumably the implication.
Certainly. I mean, you can just look at the record. I mean, the meetings are of the Access Committee, which was supposedly the secret negotiation committee for Brexit, which operated out of the Cobra rooms at my request from summer 2019, leaked like a sieve continually.
Okay. So you had Cobra, which was nominally the fulcrum of the response.
Yes.
But you didn't go, the Prime Minister didn't go. You said on one of your tweets this week that if we'd had competent people in charge, we probably could have avoided lockdown 1. But you and the Prime Minister didn't consider yourself to be relevant to that meeting. Was there another meeting, or were you not the most competent, relevant people?
Well, as I said, I was having meetings about it, but I was having meetings with people like Patrick, by myself, or with 2 or 3 other people in a forum where I knew that they wouldn't leak. Lots of the Cobra meetings are quite formulaic. In terms of the Prime Minister, the basic thought was that in February, the Prime Minister regarded this as just a scare story. He described it as the new swine flu.
Did you tell him it wasn't?
Certainly. But the view of various officials inside Number 10 was, if we have the Prime Minister chairing Cobra meetings and he just tells everyone it's swine flu, don't worry about it, I'm going to get Chris Whitty to inject me live on TV with coronavirus so everyone realises it's nothing to be frightened of, that would not help actually serious planning.
Okay, but you talk about people in Number 10 and you described the dysfunctionality of Cobra. You're not just a person in Number 10. You are literally, your title was the chief advisor,
Actually, that wasn't, with respect, that actually wasn't my title. My title was assistant to the Prime Minister.
Right.
But
So you didn't consider yourself to be the most senior person in Number 10?
Well, I mean, I'm not the most senior person in Number 10. The Cabinet Secretary is the most.
You did actually end up resigning at the end of the year. Can you understand how to some people it looks like you resigned after losing a power struggle in Number 10, but you didn't resign over issues that cost thousands of lives, and how that makes people angry?
Well, I mean, there's so many crazy stories about what happened in Number 10 that are mostly untrue. So all I'd say to people is don't believe what you read in the newspapers about things like that. I think that.
So your resignation had nothing to do with Lee Kay not being appointed to the position you wanted. Things like that.
So my resignation was definitely connected to the fact that the Prime Minister's girlfriend was trying to change a whole bunch of different appointments in Number 10 and appoint her friends to particular jobs. In particular, she was trying to overturn the outcome of an official process about hiring a particular job in a way which was not